How's it going, guys? This is the Core 3 from FightingGamesOnline.info, and I am back with another Fighting Words. Dragon Ball FighterZ auto combo system has spurred some interesting debates as of late, resurfacing an interesting question about where developers are taking fighting games in this current generation, which brings us to the conversation at hand. Is making fighting games easier a good thing? I believe the introduction of Street Fighter V is where this conversation first got its legs. It was obvious that the developers of this famous franchise wanted to get more players involved in the latest offering, and as a result, made some pretty big changes to the combat system. They would do this by taking away proximity normals, doing away with one-frame links, and increasing the damage for fairly easy to execute combos. As you might imagine, these changes were not received very well by many within the community. The biggest argument was that making things easier lowered the skill gap and gave unskilled players an advantage that they did not have before. After really looking at Street Fighter V as a whole, I was inclined to believe this as true, but I felt there were some issues that played a bigger hand in this fact. Another concern that many advanced players brought up was not being able to distinguish their individualism through the character of choice. Essentially, the lack of options make it nearly impossible to create anything original, which makes many feel like the game has no real excitement. Fast forward 2 years later and Dragon Ball FighterZ is now unleashed to the masses. The game was developed by Arc System Works, who before this time had earned a reputation as having some of the most execution-heavy fighting games on the market. It would seem they too wanted to create a game that got more players involved. They would do this by spreading their original auto combo system across all available attack buttons. They would also make the inputs for their super moves simple as well, and made most of the characters operate somewhat in the same nature. While FighterZ seems to have a much better reception overall, there are still some who are very unhappy with the auto combo system. Some argue that it has unfair advantages and exploits that should make it an option rather than a main inclusion. Many hardcore fighting fans fear that this is going to be the continuing practice moving forward, especially when it comes to longer running franchises. While I can partly understand the frustration, I also feel like these recent changes only seem to be a cause of concern among a certain group of players who enjoy challenging execution. I've noticed that in both instances, execution mainly points to closing the skill gap as cause of concern, but putting this further under the microscope, I tend to think a few things are being overlooked. Execution, in my opinion, makes up about 50% of your level of skill in fighting games. If we break this 50 down further, I would say about 25% of an individual skill level is based on reaction on both the offensive and defensive ends of the spectrum. Making the game easier, at least if done correctly, should in no way affect a player's ability to react. In fact, it should increase their chances of success when making a correct decision. Now, in terms of the other 50%, overall knowledge, mind games, and additional strategies basically make up the rest of what makes a fighting game a fighting game. So in essence, lowering the barrier of execution doesn't quite affect the skill gap, it just lowers the barrier of execution. When looking at the auto combo used in Dragon Ball FighterZ, I liken it to taking a training wheels approach to the game design. In the training wheel stage, players can essentially learn how each attack operates, work on movement, and learn basic strategies. Once they have gotten a grasp of these concepts, it is then time to take the training wheels off and get into more advanced nuances of execution. Of course, without the correct instructions, I do not believe it will have the proper effect, and I'm pretty sure only a few will truly benefit from this approach. Now, while I do think making things easier does have its benefits, I've come to an understanding that it does have some pretty big negatives. Just spending a few hours with a special Street Fighter V PC mod truly brought this into perspective. While messing around in the training room, I found something that I had yet to find in the original Street Fighter V, and that was endless possibilities. Simply put, sometimes being able to do more, as challenging as it may be, is more engaging than someone looking for an easier experience may fail to realize. So in conclusion, is making fighting games easier a good thing? This is honestly a very tough question to answer. I often tend to think about the generational gap and its effects on the experience when it comes to those just getting introduced to the genre. If making things easier ultimately generates more interest in the genre, then why would that not be a good thing? Well, basically, something that for some time has been an apparent draw of fighting games is going to become somewhat lost. Ever since Street Fighter II, it has always felt like fighting games had no ceiling. Now I'm honestly starting to feel like some actually do. Part of what makes fighting games enjoyable is execution. Sure, these days execution is the main reason why many make the immediate decision to head to the training room rather than playing the game itself, but anyone who truly enjoys fighting games eventually becomes accustomed to this. That is, if that's how you want to play. Ultimately, I think either way you can still enjoy fighting games. The question that one is always going to come to though is for how long. Well, that is it for this latest episode of Fighting Words. Drop those thoughts into the comment section below and take it easy.